Good evening, good afternoon, and good morning from wherever you are joining, and welcome to this debate on the humanitarian situation in Mali. My name is Emilie Reinholdt, and I'm joining you from Denmark, where I work as a moderator through my company Reinholdt Debates. And apart from that, I have worked with conflicts and studied political systems in African countries, particularly in Mali. Today's debate is organized by the Friedrich Naumann Foundation for Freedom, which is a political foundation based in the values of freedom and liberalism. And it's a foundation which works worldwide and has 60 offices in total. And they offer political education based in the values of democracy, human rights, and liberalism as well. And the debate is organized together with CARE Germany, which is, for the ones of you who didn't know, is a humanitarian organization working with aid and development, and they work in around 100 countries. Yeah, this debate is a part of a web talk series based in CARE's annual report, Suffering in Silence, the 10 most underreported humanitarian crises of 2020. And this report has been conducted the last 5 years, and Mali has actually been on CARE's list both in 2015, in 2017, and now again in 2020. And that's, of course, why we today dive into the humanitarian crisis in Mali and hopefully also discuss some of the solutions towards the crisis. So now let me take you through the agenda of today, because first of all, we will get an overview of how is the political situation in the country right now, what's going on, and why has it developed like it has. Then we will go further and we will discuss a little bit more about the humanitarian situation and get an overview of how is the humanitarian situation right now, how is the conditions on the ground. Then we turn to discuss the question of why is the crisis in Mali not reported more in the mainstream media? And then finally, we turn to look at some of the solutions to this crisis. Yeah, and to answer all these questions and debate these themes, I'm very lucky to have a wonderful panel with me today, consisting of, let me introduce them, Christoph Hoffmann, Member of Parliament and Development Speaker for FDP, the Free Democratic Party in Germany. We have Mahamudu Wembe Ara, Interim Regional Humanitarian Coordinator for West Africa, and you're also Regional Humanitarian Advocacy Advisor in CARE International. That was a long title. And then finally, we have Laurie Nukusum, Access to Justice Chief in USAID Mali. And I do apologize for my pronunciation of your last names. I will have to practice more on that, I can see. But a warm welcome to all three of you. It's great to have you with me. And also a warm welcome to our participants joining in today. It's great that you want to spend an hour with us discussing this important topic. I'll inform you that you have the opportunity to ask questions throughout the debate. Please use the Q&A function if you have any, and I'll see if I can throw them in throughout the debate. Otherwise, I'll save some questions to the end of the debate and ask them there. So please use that function if you are curious on anything regarding the humanitarian situation in Mali. All right, and with those words, let's start the debate. And let's start, as I said, with getting an overview of the political situation in Mali. We are actually talking about a country which has experienced not less than 2 coups within the last 10 months. I think that needs an explanation and also an introduction. So Christoph, I'll now hand over to you. And can you please paint a picture for us of the political and the humanitarian situation in Mali right now and why it looks like it does?
Yeah, heartily welcome from me to all of the participants and audience. Yeah, the situation in Mali is quite difficult to explain, and I haven't been there for just over a year. So whatever I say, I'm not quite sure if the situation on the ground is absolutely correct. So, but from what we see is that we had a putsch in August 2020. I've been there visiting Mali after that putsch, and there was demonstrations within the population because the former government of Mr. Keita, the president, was a very weak government. And I have never seen a country being choked by corruption as Mali. So the function of the whole state, like police, like courts and schools, were not functioning in most of the country. And when people see that there's no service of the government and no service of the state, why should they believe in that state? So this was the basic problem that in the situation in 2020. So people were overwhelmingly welcoming the first putsch in Mali because the situation couldn't get any worse. And it was a putsch from younger militarians, also a protest against the older generals who were corrupt, why they were fighting on the front with hardly any good equipment. The generals were sunbathing in some resorts in the Caribbean. So that was sort of a hope that the first putsch would do anything better. But then we had this second putsch after 6 months of the interim government. And the interim government was, in the beginning, it was wholly military, but then ECOWAS stepped in. ECOWAS told them to have a civil president and have a huge civil participation in this interim government. And that worked quite well for 6 months. And there was some good points, like trying to get to fight corruption much better than it was before. And they were also following up human rights violations and things like that, which didn't happen before. And so everybody was sort of a little optimistic. But then the second putsch came, where the military, Mr. Goita especially, who is the military leader of the first putsch, put himself into presidency, and with a second putsch. And both putsch were sort of a very harmless putsch. There was hardly any shots fired. There was hardly any people being shot. It was sort of a very calm putsch, if you want so. But then we see now that the military is in a lot of civil positions. They took up a lot of government and administration structures within the country are now being ruled by the military. And so this is a question whether or not the contract between ECOWAS and the interim government will proceed as foreseen. And Mr. Goita, he promised free elections in February 2022. And I'm a little bit skeptical if this is going to work out, because there is no security in a large parts of the country. And without security, how can you vote? And without security, how can the country develop? So this development of this country is combined with security. And there's hardly any place in the world where you can see it much closer than in Mali, that these two things have to come together. You have to have a Mali army and a police who could guarantee security for the people. I mean, you cannot plow a field if there is bullets in the air. So this is the situation, and it has to come to a peace. Then you have this UNISMA, a UN mission with about 10,000 soldiers who are trying to keep peace. They are not an aggressive mission. They are sort of a peacekeeping force. And then you have Barkhane, a French mission, which are with 5,000 soldiers of France who are aggressively fighting terrorists. But Macron, after the second putsch, he sort of said, we'll stop Barkhane. And but then there is another EU mission, EUT in Mali, where the Europeans try to train Malian soldiers to defend themselves, and so the Malian army will be capable of really fight terrorism and fight anarchism and fight corruption as well. And but then this UTM training mission is not working that quite fast enough, I'd say. And but there was some advantages, and there was some advance. And but then you have another mission of the European countries called Takuba, which is sort of replacing Barkhane, which is a mission with special forces from various countries like Sweden, Lithuania, and so forth, and in cooperation with the G5 Sahel. And this Takuba should be a security force, a rapid force deployment force, and it should work in not only in Mali, also in Burkina and Niger. So we have a lot of problems there. And within the interim government, there's also, they want to work on a new constitution. They want to have a fourth republic. And the constitution itself is sort of the French constitution, a little variant of a French constitution. And now it's the time to have a new constitution there, which has a lot more adaptation to the circumstances in this country of about 20 million people. German development aid has been there for more than 50 years. And we'll try to keep on this development aid for this country because the humanitarian situation is rather bad. We have about 13 million in the Sahel itself who need aid. In Mali, it's about 3.5 million people who are starving, and there's a lot of refugees and so forth. And in Mali itself, I mean, the potential of agriculture in Mali is that good that they could easily feed their own people. They could easily feed 2 other countries besides Mali if there would be security and no corruption. So you can see in this country, there's a lot of potential, but there is a lot of disturbancy by corruption and these bad governance things. Then we have active players besides France and the European countries. There is also Russia playing a little role, and China. And Russia is active, a little bit hybrid war type thing. So they're not trying to rule Mali. They're just trying to minder the influence of the West in that part of the world. So this is sort of a last piece of the Cold War, if you want so. So, and there is China, who is economically engaging itself there. And so overall, that's about the situation that we have there. It's rather complicated, and it's very difficult to find a good solution. And we will see if Mr. Goita is being able to deliver what the interim government has promised.
Thanks a lot, Christoph. I think you did a very good job there, painting the picture for us of a very complicated political situation. Indeed, you said a lot of very interesting things. Also pointed to some solutions already, I think, which we are returning to. But let me first get over to Laurie, because now Christoph started out by saying that he hasn't been in Mali for 1 year. I know you have, Laurie, and you have been in Mali actually for many years now. For the time being, you work for USAID, sorry, as I said in the introduction. But before that, you worked for the American Bar Association Rule of Law Initiative, where you advised the Malian government on justice. And thus you have followed the political situation closely in Mali. I think it could be interesting to follow up and get your comments on Christoph's view on the political situation right now. Is that also how you see? Do you see other problems you want to add into the discussion, or can you help us paint a picture as well?
Thank you, Emily. And thank you to everyone for tuning in. I think Christopher did a very good job in such a short time, painting the situation in Mali, especially given the fact that he mentioned that he has not been here for a year or so. So yeah, I think we are a bit like in the quagmire in Mali. I mean, two coups in less than a year, just on the heel of the 2012 coup d'etat. And I think I would like to mention also the fact that the social climate is quite strained. I think most governments for the past 5 years or so, including the government of the former president Ibeka, had to face a series of strikes from labor unions. There've been many protests and contestation from this federal government because of the salary issue from civil servants. There have been disparities in the way civil servants are being treated, whether we talk about those in the medical field or in the education sector, and in other sectors. They feel that they are not being treated fairly, especially when you compare them with those in the justice sectors. They believe that judges and prosecutors are receiving the lion's share of the civil servants' allowances and salaries. So that has created a sort of chaos in the social sphere. I mean, we've had so many strikes, and I think those strikes and that unhappiness from these government workers have contributed hugely to the crisis that Mali is facing also today. Of course, Christopher mentioned the security situation. Unfortunately, the government of Mali and its international partners have taken a security stance or a military stance to fight the security issues. But I believe they have somehow neglected the social aspect, the social and political aspect of this insecurity. Too many emphasis are being put on military intervention. But I believe what people actually need for these zones or these areas to be secure is more social infrastructures, right? Talking about schools, talking about health centers, of course, common things like internet, just to have internet to be able to communicate, with the world. And these are some of the issues that people are mentioning when you talk to people. They don't have basic social infrastructures. So I think this is contributing to the insecurity that we are seeing now today. And as I mentioned earlier, unfortunately, the government and its partners are putting too much emphasis on military intervention instead of talking about development. Developing these areas, there are no roads, there are no networks, communication and telecommunication networks. Schools have been closed for so many months now. In Mopti, for example, many places children have stopped going to school. When you are ill, you have to walk for miles and miles to find the first help center. And I will be talking mainly about the justice sector because it's something I know the most because I've been working in that sector for 5 years now in Mali. So just to thank Christopher, I think he did a very good job. I think that's actually what is happening today in Mali. I guess we'll have the time to go more into details as the conversation goes by.
Thanks a lot, Laurie. And I think as well, you also already pointed to some solutions, and it's really interesting with this discussion between development or security first and how should we prioritize. And I would like to save that discussion to the end because as I said in the introduction, this debate also very much focused on the humanitarian situation. And therefore, I think I would like to get an overview of that now as well. So let's turn to Mahamudu. As we have heard, and as you know, there is a lack of governance, especially in some of the rural areas in Mali. and that enables rebel groups and different jihadist groups also to make violent attacks. On the basis of that, Mahamudu, I would like to ask you, what are the humanitarian consequences of this political situation right now? How is the humanitarian situation on the ground?
Thank you very much, Emily, for joining, and thank you everybody for both Christopher and Lori for their brilliant intervention about the situation, particularly political situation. I think just I have one thing to add to what they raised. They have mentioned it just right now before to go to the mantra needs. But I want to to remind that the Mali is one of the largest country in West Africa, just after Niger. It's a big country. If you look at the total population of the country that they have mentioned, he mentioned it, Christopher, we have 21 million of population, and looking at the the square kilometers, the numbers of square kilometers, it's 1,300,000 and more. So it's a big country, but we have just 10% of the population we are living in the north part of the country, and then the north part of the country is 2/3 of the country, overall country in Mali. So the 90% of population are in the south and west, and the problem our current situation now is in the north part and the west, the central parts, where the 10% of the population are living now. This is just to show, and if you look at the density, in terms of inhabitants per square kilometer, it's just 2 and 3 people per 1 square kilometer in the central and the northern part. So it's a big espace. The manage is big, so that is key for addressing the humanitarian needs. Currently, talking about the humanitarian situation of Mali, all the political instability, the security issues that I have mentioned are, among the key drivers of the humanitarian situation. We have the violence and conflict and security. It's not today, it's several years. And we know now the situation is more critical. We have the climate change effect. This is very important to mention in West Africa, in Mali, particularly, all in Sahel countries in general, and the COVID-19 situation. And now we have another problem, that is the political instability. So we have a lot of problems in Mali. And despite this problem, have a weak presence of the states in place. That Lori have mentioned it. Schools are closed. Most of the schools are closed in the center part. Access to health basic services and so on. So the states of Mali has a weak presence in many parts of the north and the central parts. Population movement as a result of those security situations. The number now is above 500,000 of population displaced, including 272,000 of displacements. This is higher, at the beginning of the crisis in 2012. So it's 4 times bigger than 2019. That's all those situations we know women and girls particularly are more affected. When the displacement, when they lost everything, they have anything, they let their land there and they move for anything. And we have most of the population displacements are women. We have 56% of women displacement, and we have 61% of children. So just to look at how the challenge is bigger in terms of addressing the humanitarian need, this is very critical. And just an example, the last year we have recorded more than 6,000 of GBV in Mali, and we have 98% of survivors are women. So this is, and we have this is very, very high in terms of the health. More than 20% of health services are not functional because insecurity or because of lack of staff, because the weak presence of the states and the insecurity situation in the ground, it's very difficult to get more qualified staff in the field. The protection of civilians, very important for us because we are one of the signatories of the coalition situation, we call in French coalition situation pour le Sahel, Sahel People Coalitions. We are one among those signatories, but the problem of the Sahel in the Mali part is the protection in civilian. If we look at the first quarter of this year, we have above the 100 civilians that are lost their life in the 3 countries, Mali, Niger, Burkina, and we have most of the people in Mali. So this is just it's important. We'll say, we will talk about the solution, but I will focus just the humanitarian situation and the human rights. I have noticed something Christopher mentioned is about the following human rights regulation that the new transition government of Mali has committed. This is very important. And just the first quarter, you have 421 human rights violation that are documented in Mali. This is high, and it's very important, that the responsible for these abuse might be pushed, because it's include most of the armed groups and militant and community armed groups. Just an example, just if we look at the number of civilians that lost their life, because we know 3-5% are committed by the army, by the national and international army, instead of 24% for the army groups or militia or community army or otherwise. So this is very important, and the impunity is very important. The current government has committed to fight against impunity, to see how the responsible can be followed. So just to give you some figures about some humanitarian needs in climate change. The climate change, the problem is more critical as well, because in the Sahel in general, it's 1.5 times very fast than the rest of the Mali. Particularly for the Mali, we expect that the mean temperature, annual temperature will climb by 1.2 to 3.6 by 2060. And the damage are very biggest in terms of risk of reduced rain-fed crop yields, the increase of extent of transhuman corridors, increase of livestock mortality, in terms of decrease of the inflows, the food extent of the inner Niger, and the security situation as well regarding the food security. That security situation, we have the climate change, we have the pandemic. All the situation we expect to have 1.3 million that are expressing now, because we are in the lean season that is at risk and food security. Before to finish, just let's to focus on COVID pandemic situation that we know have been very, very, very critical on women and the life, because the resources are allocated, to others from basic services, particularly sexual and reproductive health, to COVID-19, and the restriction has impacted the supply chains of the medical supply chain, because no medical drugs, the contraceptives, no lack of contraceptives for pregnant women in the field. Most of the women, displaced people are women. We have seen in the rapid gender analysis provided by Mali that we have some gender inequalities that was very challenging, because sometimes some women have shared with us that sometimes the men, their husbands, are refusing to give them permission to go to the health center. This is something that that I can highlight it from myself. So I stop here. Maybe if you are.
Yeah, Mahamadou. Yeah, I'm just gonna stop you here. Thanks a lot for painting the picture for us of the humanitarian terrible situation in Mali right now. I think it creates a really good ground for this further discussion, and time is unfortunately running, so I'll move on already to the next question, where we will focus on why this is not reported more in the mainstream news, because one could point to that one of the reasons why we see these humanitarian crises and why they're also escalating is the lack of focus on this humanitarian crisis. So let's turn to that part of the discussion now. And I would like to go over to you again, Christoph, because now we have you both made a really good overview of the political situation and the humanitarian situation as well. And when we hear about this chaotic political situation, we hear how engaged we are from many European countries, other international countries. We hear what a terrible humanitarian situation we have down there. One might wonder why we don't really hear that much about it in the mainstream media. So can you give us your answer to that question?
I mean, in general, in German newspapers and German media, you hardly see anything about Africa. You see more in the English press, and you see much more in the French press. But German press is very hardly anything to find. And of course, Mali is a small country, and it's 6,000, 7,000 kilometers away from the center of Europe. So it's not right in the focus. But when it comes to foreign aid and international cooperation, Mali is quite a center. I mean, they have been receiving very much money during the last 5 years, I'd say. Mali was sort of a focus in the Sahel, where there was a lot of cooperation and a lot of activities going on, because the Europeans said, we cannot win this military battle. We have to have the security forces being accompanied by development, and especially in agriculture and so forth. So these things started to work, but then there's too much insecurity, and there's too much of the terrorists, and the terrorists mix up with bandits, and it's not organized terrorism, if you want. So it's more a chaos, and people taking advantage of a chaotic situation. And so it's hard to deliver humanitarian aid.
I'm just gonna stop you there for a while, Christoph. Yeah, sorry. Because we will come back to that, but if we can keep to the media part now, you said it was not much reported in the German newspapers, even though it's financed and it's on the political agenda. Can you elaborate a bit more on why don't you think it's interesting for the mainstream media to report on this?
I really cannot tell, because personally, I think the Sahel zone is very important for Europe in general, for our future. Our future is connected. But the only correspondent who writes articles in German in Africa is in Kapstadt, in Cape Town. He's nowhere than in Cape Town. So if you see a report from Mali, it's written in Cape Town. And so, I mean, there is no coverage, there's no interest, the news don't sell. I think that's the reason why there is not much news, because the news don't sell. And because people have not understood that the fortune and the development in the Sahel will touch Europe sooner or later.
Thanks a lot, and we will return to other solutions to that later in this round. But I would like to call up on Mahamadou one more time. Do you agree with Christoph when he's saying that this could be a part of the reason why the crisis in Mali is not more in the news, that basically it doesn't sell that much, and people haven't understood the importance of the crisis?
Yeah, thank you, Amelie. No, I think Christopher was shared that was appropriate for the context in Germany. This is sure, but for my side, the Malian crisis is a protracted, crisis. It takes long. I think it's more 10 years. The situation, the Mali crisis began 10 years ago, and most. So it's maybe we have seen fatigue, maybe a major fatigue in covering such protected crisis about which there is no also prevailing impatience. Maybe there is no way out, no solution. Another thing is, unfortunately, the media cover more the political situations like coup or like the military intervention, because for so far the solutions are exclusively military and security in the Sahel, particularly in Mali. So more focus on the media is on political situations, military intervention, but they speak very little about the situation, humanitarian situation, and the innocent civilian trapped in this conflict. So another point from my side is the COVID-19 that has magnified the media's lack of attention to Mali. notably by limiting the ability to travel to the country and diverting their political leaders' attention to the side effect of COVID-19 in developing countries. However, the situation changed. We will talk about the solution because the current technology like the smartphone can change this. The international media must force links with the local media, but also directly with the individual affected by the humanitarian crisis. I will mention this later, but about the solution. But for my side, so yeah, we have just a couple. I have just a couple reasons for my side. The first one is the fatigue of the media to cover this kind of proactive crisis. The second one is relating by focus more humanitarian, both political and security situation instead of humanitarian situation particularly. And the last one is the COVID-19 that have restriction to move, to travel, to grow.
Thanks. I know, Mahamadou, we are actually slowly approaching the discussion about the solutions as well. And I think it's relevant now to ask you, because I know that in the Suffering in Silence, the CARE report, you have actually suggested 10 things in the end of the report in terms of what we can do if we want to get more focus, or if we want to attract the mainstream media's attention to the crisis in Mali. Can you just shortly, before we move to Laurie, elaborate a little bit on some of these solutions?
Yeah, so there is the solution, but to address this lack of attention of media, there is other solution. The solution to mitigate the crisis in the humanitarian crisis. But you are talking about the media. For the media, the solution for my side is just now it's maybe the COVID-19, is for me an opportunity. But the international media should use the pandemic as an opportunity to change their current narrative and amplify local voices. So with special attention to women and girls, because the international media can seek partnership with local media organizations. They do not only better understand the context, but they also tend to have better connection on the ground. It's a kind of lesson learned. And if we have the church crisis like COVID and that restrict the movement, and remotely the international media can work with local media, for example, like citizen journalists approach like that. This is an option that can be supported. It's particularly necessary to give a voice to women's media organizations. So that is the solution for this one. But if we want that to move to the solution to address the crisis, just for information.
We will stop there from now, and then we will go further in the solution round. But I would like to go further to Laurie on this, because some of the things you also talk about, Mahamadou, and some of the things you mentioned earlier, Laurie, is that it's not only an issue with communicating what's happening in Mali to the rest of the world, it's also an issue communicating internally in Mali amongst the people. There are also misinformation internally amongst the Malians and so on. Can you tell us a little bit more about how you experience that, and what are the consequences of that?
Yeah, thank you. I think internally in Mali, people are quite aware of what's happening. Whether it's the communities are affected by these humanitarian factors that Mahamadou so brilliantly explained, or national, international stakeholders, political stakeholders, social stakeholders. I think the situation is quite well understood by all of these actors. I think I may explain the reason why the international media, mainstream media, are not or are underreporting this humanitarian crisis in Mali. For me, as you know, like three factors. The first one is that medias are quite fond of sensationalism. It's a fact of our time. Everybody like the buzz, because now the political situation in Mali, for example, has been widely covered. The coup d'etat has been covered, as Mahamadou mentioned earlier when he was speaking. the transitional government has been well covered as well by the mainstream media. We have France 24 that's covering a lot, TV5 in France. I think Christopher was right when he said that the French, for example, and the English, because they are quite well present on the ground, so they cover this political development in Mali. But the humanitarian crisis is not that well covered. The second reason being is that today no one is really interested in the small guy. No one wants to see a hungry child on TV or a weeping woman. All of these they will say it's a deja vu. They want fresh stuff, so they are not really interested in the little guy anymore. And I think the third factor may be that the world is undergoing a crazy time. We have so many humanitarian crises around the world today, so it's only fair that these mainstream media, international media, cover more some other countries like Yemen today, or I don't know, Palestine, or the Rohingyas in Myanmar. So all of these crises are somehow diverting, right, the focus of these international media from the crisis in the Sahel, generally in Mali, in particular. So you also ask what may be some of the solutions. I think today it's not impossible for us to consider bypassing international media altogether. I'm a bit radical on my position, because I know Mohamed will talk about potential partnership between the international media and local media. It may be a solution, but I think local actors, activists, political actors, the positive one, may have to consider using social media and showing success stories as well. We shouldn't just focus on the negative, aspect of the humanitarian crisis, but also the positives, because too often we focus on what is not working, but we also have to share, success story, what is working. On the care, for example, is doing a fantastic job in the field. So these things have to be shown, and I think social media is one way to go.
Thanks a lot. I noticed that now both you and Mahamadou has mentioned this about reframing the narrative and also tell the good things and a lot of other solutions. So let's move a little bit further, and I'll remind the audience, I can see there's one question in the Q&A, but please do come in with more, and I'll wrap up in a few minutes. But first, I would like to follow up with a question to you, Christoph, because I stopped you before where you were starting talking about the solutions. And now we are we are in the round where we can talk a little bit more about the solutions. And I think it's interesting because you have talked about security as being very important, security for the people, first of all, during elections. Without security, how can people vote, and so on? We need to ensure that. Also, there is a potential for agriculture, you said in the beginning, but without security, that doesn't really work. But we can see that the international troops has been deployed in Mali since 2013, but then since then, violent attacks have increased, and younger Malians have actually joined rebel groups, and that makes many professionals in the fields point to the fact that we are focused too much on security, and we should focus more on what they call the root causes, good governance and so on. Some of the things Laurie also talked about in the beginning. So I'd like to ask you about that. Doesn't this call for new solutions where we focus more on good governance and some of the root causes rather than focusing on the security first?
I agree, absolutely. I mean, what we think, and what is important is, like, now you have a new generation, a young generation. The old political class has to go and is gone. And if there will be free elections, I'm very confident that this is going to be a new young government. And I hope it's going to be a young and female government, because women play a crucial role in Africa. They're more reliable, they're more long-term thinking, no matter how that, I don't know where that comes from, but it's the case. And so if they have a new constitution, new election laws, that should really help and bring things to the stop. But then you also have to include some groups which are sort of neglected in the north. There was the Peace Accord of Algiers, which has to be respected. I mean, it hasn't been too much progress on this. In this peace agreement, there was certain conditions, and hardly anything of that has been put into place. So this is another thing which has to come. And I see the interim government has been working on that quite a bit. And then there has to be reconciliation. I mean, there's a lot of human rights violations have been made, but there was no punishment so far. And you have to have a punishment, otherwise you won't have peace. And you have to focus in the international or in the development, you have to focus on education, and the health system. So if people see there's progress on the ground, that schools start working again, because schools in Mali hardly work anywhere except for the capital. And if people see there's progress, then they will join in and there will be more peace. So one thing comes together with another. But of course, there is armed rebel groups which have to be fought. I mean, there's no question about it. They want gold. They don't want peace. They want gold. So, I mean, you have to make a decision in there. So I think we should continue in empowering the Malian army to care for Mali and the security in Mali. But the whole problem starts with this size of the country. I mean, the north of the country is so huge, so large. I mean, you cannot guarantee security everywhere in this huge land. And I mean, the borders of Mali have been drawn with sticks in the sand of the colonial power. I mean, this is where the whole problem really starts. And but I think if you have a good new constitution, a decentralization, and have money in regional governments, that could really help and bring things forward.
Thanks a lot, Christophe. And now we actually have a question from the audience. So I think, and I think this would be good for you, Laurie, and maybe Mahamadou can follow up as well. I'll read it out loud. It's from Jörg Ramseger. What is actually the situation within the military government? Does the army really care for the country to make things better, or do they intend to improve the situation of the people, or are they just interested of having power and taking advantages of the power to improve their personal wealth and their clans and families and so on? A very good and relevant question here, I think. Laurie, do you want to go first?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I mean, it's hard to say because the interim government has been in place for about 6, 7, 8 months, and I mean, the first one had to face a coup d'état, and by the same junta that carried out the first coup in August of 2020. So it's actually hard to say whether they mean well for the country, or whether they just want to repeat or have the same privileges that the previous government had. But I think early signs show that there are some positives that we can take out of what's happening in the country today. For example, earlier in my intervention, I mentioned the fact that one of the factors explaining the crisis is the continuous strikes from labor unions. And the military government has taken that problem very seriously. There have been serious discussions with labor unions to find a solution out of this quagmire. And I believe they are on their way finding a solution to that problem. So at least that's something positive that I can outline. to argue that they actually mean well for the country. Now, ultimately, what will decide or determine their real intention will be the organization of the elections. I think Christopher mentioned earlier that it will be very tough to organize the elections in February because that's what is planned. I believe they will have a presidential election in February, but they may not have the legislative elections. That would be very tough to undertake. So ultimately, we will see what will happen. If they can organize the elections and don't be part of it, then we can say that yes, they actually mean well. They actually intended, the country to get back on track. But if they claim on power, then of course we may have a lot of questions to ask ourselves.
Thanks a lot, Laurie. And when we move to you, Mahamadou, I think it's interesting when we talk about solutions. I know that you have spoken more for regional solutions, also solutions across countries or across the Malian border. So we not only focus on a solution only in Mali and for the country, but we also look a little bit on how the conflict dynamics are going over borders, and thus we have to solve the problems with the neighboring countries and so on. Can you elaborate a little bit on that and why that would be important for a solution for Mali?
Yeah. Thank you very much. I will be very brief regarding the time. So I think, as you mentioned, the problem is the mistake is to not address the Mali humanitarian situation like as standalone, because Mali is part of particularly the Central Sahel, which is bordering with Niger and Burkina. If we solve problems in Mali and the problem rest continue in Niger, how to solve the problem in Burkina, the problem is not solved in Mali. So we have, you have to take account to kind of regional or sub-regional initiative. This is very important. But particularly the country, that's something I forgot to mention, is the funding level. If you look at the funding, but we expect in this year, $563 million. As 1st of July, we have just 20% that funding secured, 20% at the midterm of the year. It's very critical. So it's very important, to urge the donors and international partners to increase the funding because regarding the needs of the populations. But we have, 55% of the population of Mali are in humanitarian needs. So very high regarding the funding that have secured. You mentioned conflict and security and so on. That's very interesting, important to respect the international humanitarian law and the humanitarian principle in humanitarian operation in Mali. The fight against impunity must be the heart of the strategy to protect the civilian. We must put more money to find DBV protection because just 6% of the fund that recovered at the midterm of this year. In terms of solutions, the key solution for us is how to reinforce the leadership and the participation and the voice of women and girls in the humanitarian response. Very interesting for us. We have implemented, some key lessons, key success in the pandemic, and we have seen the Village Save Loans Association. It's like groups of women that organize and that care and partners are supporting, are doing a great job because without lack of funding, the restriction and so on, those groups were leading the humanitarian, sensitizing the population. They produce the masks. They always, push the government, the municipalities to take upon their voices, to prevent the GBV, by example. Before to finish the situation in Mali, particularly the conflict, the conflict and peace, and we have to make sure that we take upon the peace dimensions addressing humanitarian needs in Mali. It's not both humanitarian and development, but the peace must be, have the trust nexus to make sure that women are central for the conflict resolutions for a sustainable peace in the region. So the localization is key.
And thank you.
Yeah,
localization is key, and yeah.
Just 1 second, 2 seconds. Just on the fund record security, we have 0 fund, zero fund to local and national NGO. This is a key issue I wanted to raise. Over to you.
Thanks, thanks a lot, Mahamadou. And we are running out of time. We have a very interesting question, and if we're really quick, I think Christoph, you might be able to provide a short answer to that. I'll read out. Since the main a question from the audience, since the main export gold, since the main export good in Mali is gold, and since the UAE and Switzerland are the main importers of Mali and gold, how do you see those two in terms of stabilization efforts and contributing to humanitarian and development funding in Mali? And do you think that Mali can support a larger scale of necessary services to the population if the gold business is being more used for the benefit of the white population? A very short answer, but I think it was such an interesting question that we should not miss it.
Theoretically, yes, but in practice, if you don't have a government framework, if you don't have security, if you don't have the rule of law, it's difficult to handle gold and the affairs and the gains of this commodity. So theoretically, yes. But let me come back to two little things. Just let me mention two little things more. Regarding the media, I mean, we have just had this attack on the Minusma patrol where 10 German soldiers were wounded. Of course, this was a huge media outcry in Germany. But if you have gains in development, like the yield of rice in Mali has improved in certain areas, of course, this is no news in Germany. But this is important news if we have any progress in agriculture, for instance. And the question regarding the military, if the military is filling their own pockets or really working for the people in the country, I'm not quite sure. I'd love to address this question to Mr. Goiter one day.
Yeah, and I'm sorry, but we will have to end here, unfortunately, because as I said, we are running out of time. But I think we had a very, very interesting discussion. Hopefully new solutions were brought up here, having a more positive focus when we talk about how to focus more on Mali in the news, in the mainstream news, get more focus on it, have more journalists down there also locally. That was some of the answers. You agreed on both development and security, that both things are important aspects. And then we are all very excited to see whether these elections will be held in February 2020. We cross fingers and hopefully they are legitimate, but we will wait and see. But thanks a lot to the panel, our panelists today. Thanks for, I think at least I learned a lot, and I hope our audience did as well. Thanks a lot to the audience for some good questions. We had a lot of different questions going in different directions, and I think that illustrates Mali and the situation down there quite a lot as well. It's there are a lot of things to debate, so please go on and debate them further. Thank you all for taking the time. And I have to remind you that, as I said in the beginning, this is a web talk series, and that means that we have two more, the organizations have two more web series coming up. These are the last ones, and the next one will be on Papua New Guinea, the 19th of July, next Monday, and then the last one on Zambia, the 26th of July, the following Monday. So if you thought this debate was interesting, you can go and watch these as well. Thanks a lot to all of you for joining this important debate today, and have a very nice evening.